A millionaire followed his maid after work. What he discovered changed his life. I built my entire life on one principle: control. Control over my business, control over my investments, control over every detail that could possibly go wrong. So, when I noticed that food was disappearing from my kitchen, small things at first, a pack of pasta, a few cans, some fruit, it triggered something in me. Not anger, not even suspicion, just that instinct I've always had, the one that made me a billionaire in the first place, the urge to know, to uncover, to fix. At first, I thought it could be carelessness. Maybe a chef forgetting to register ingredients, maybe staff sharing things among themselves. But something didn't feel right, and I don't believe in ignoring what doesn't feel right. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I waited. On a Wednesday evening, I parked 2 blocks away from my house in the Murrumbidgee Hills, lights out, engine off. I watched from a distance, waiting for someone to slip. I didn't expect it to be her, Sarah. She had worked for me for over 5 years, reliable, quiet, almost invisible. I saw her walk through the gate, carrying 2 heavy grocery bags. My heart sank, not from betrayal, but from the realization that I had never really looked at her. She was just there, like furniture, like the marble floor she polished, necessary, useful, unknown. I followed her through the subway lines, the stations, the transfers. I hadn't stepped on public transportation since college. Every bump, every push, every sound, it was like landing on a different planet. She never looked back, never suspected. Her focus was fixed, her pace steady. I was 3 steps behind when she entered the apartment building, a modest structure with worn-out walls but alive. Kids played in the entrance, music leaked through windows. She climbed the stairs slowly. I saw her wince once, pain, maybe, or fatigue, but she kept going. From the hallway, I heard her voice, soft and warm. Then I heard another voice, a boy's voice, weak, struggling, half words, half breath. "Mom, the doctor said my pressure is dropping again." Her response was instant. "I know, baby. We'll share the pills again this week." I froze. My mind couldn't catch up with what my ears had just heard. Share the pills again. It was all there, the bags, the food, the disappearing medicine from my cabinet. Not theft, survival. I left before they noticed me. My chest felt tight, not from shame, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time, humility. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table, staring at my coffee. The steam curled upward like a question mark. Sarah moved around the kitchen as she always did, silent, efficient, invisible. But now I saw her, really saw her. Her hands slightly trembled as she poured the juice. Her eyes were dim, not with tiredness, but with weight, the kind of weight that doesn't lift with sleep. I wanted to say something, ask her about the night before, about the boy, about the pills, but my tongue stayed still. How do you break years of silence with a single question? Instead, I watched, listened, and remembered. Every day, she arrived on time. Every day, she did her work, no complaints, no absences. She never asked for a raise, never asked for help. I had never once asked about her life, not really. I knew nothing of her world, and yet, she knew everything about mine. She cleaned my photos, polished my awards, arranged my suits. She knew what wine I liked, what time I showered, what book I left unfinished on the nightstand. That night, I went back, not to spy, not out of suspicion, but for something else, something I wasn't ready to name. I stood again in the hallway, listening. "Mom, I'm scared. What if the pills aren't enough this time?" "Don't be. We'll figure it out. We always do." Her voice cracked. I could hear the effort she made to keep it from breaking completely. On Saturday, I followed her again, but this time, she didn't go home. She walked past her street, carrying a box of old books. I trailed behind her until we reached a small community center, run down, graffiti on the walls, broken fence. She walked in and was greeted by kids, a dozen, maybe more. They called her by name. They hugged her. She smiled. Then she began reading to them out loud, her voice clear, confident, commanding. She was no longer invisible. She was someone else entirely, a leader, a guide, a light in a place most people wouldn't dare to enter. I leaned against the wall, stunned. I had no idea. Sarah, the maid who cleaned my windows, who folded my towels, was running a reading group for underprivileged kids, using her own time, her own books, with no help, no support, no applause. And I had judged her for taking food. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't pity. It was admiration, raw and honest, the kind that humbles you, the kind that forces you to re-examine everything you think you know about people, about class, about dignity. She wasn't stealing. She was surviving. She was serving. She was saving a life, not just her son's, but mine, in a way I was only beginning to understand. If this story is moving you like it moved me, leave a comment, tell me your thoughts, or share a story that changed your view of someone you thought you knew. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because there's more to come, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Monday came. I called in sick to the office, a ridiculous move for someone like me. But the idea of sitting through meetings and stock reports felt absurd, not after what I had seen, not after realizing how narrow my world had become. I told my assistant to clear my calendar. I needed time, not for rest, but to think, really think. I spent the day walking through places I hadn't seen in decades. Markets, alleyways, forgotten cafes, all corners of the same city that built my fortune, but a city I barely knew from the inside. Everywhere I looked, I saw lives happening, lives that didn't need my money or my company, just my presence, my eyes, my ears. I had lived too long believing people needed to impress me, when all I ever needed to do was notice them. Later that week, I visited the clinic where Sarah took her son. I waited outside, leaning on a column. She arrived with him, carefully adjusting his steps, whispering soft encouragement. I watched as she spoke to the receptionist, her voice low, explaining that she didn't have the full amount for the medication. Could they wait? Could they split the pills? The answer was no. I stepped in. I asked to speak with the doctor, a friend of mine, someone who owed me a few favors. I explained the situation, not in detail, not using her name, just enough to get attention, just enough to open a door. When Sarah turned and saw me, her expression didn't change, not anger, not surprise, but a calm sort of disappointment, like she knew this moment would come. "You followed me again," she said. "Yes," I replied. "Why?" I wanted to understand. At first, it was suspicion, then curiosity, and now it's something else. I'm still figuring it out. She nodded slowly. Her lips tightened, not into a smile, but something like acceptance, or maybe exhaustion. "We don't want your help." "I know, but I want to offer it anyway." She shook her head. "We're not charity cases." "No, you're not. You're stronger than anyone I've met, and that's exactly why I want to help, not out of pity, but out of respect." Her eyes met mine for the first time in full, and in them, I saw everything, years of struggle, nights of worry, mornings of courage. And beneath all of it, a pride I had never known, not the pride of wealth or recognition, but the pride of survival. It changed something in me, something I couldn't undo. I returned home that night and stood in the hallway outside my study, looking at the shelves of awards, photographs, plaques. For the first time, they looked small, insignificant, hollow. None of them told the story that Sarah lived every single day. None of them carried the weight she carried in silence. And I, a man surrounded by abundance, had never once known what it meant to truly sacrifice. That night, I made a decision, one that would unravel my routine, disrupt my comfort, and maybe, just maybe, bring me closer to the version of myself I had buried beneath all the success. The following Saturday, I returned to the community center. This time, I brought books, dozens of them, picture books, science books, stories about astronauts, about animals, about hope. I told no one, not even Sarah. I just walked in during their session and waited near the door until she noticed me. The kids turned first, curious eyes lighting up. Then her gaze found mine, and for a second, I saw her falter, just a bit, not out of fear, but uncertainty, like she couldn't decide whether to ask me to leave or say thank you. I raised the box slightly, the smallest gesture. I thought they might enjoy these. The kids swarmed, giggles, chatter, wide-eyed wonder at the colorful covers and crisp pages, books that didn't smell of dust or wear, but possibility. Sarah stepped back, letting them explore, letting them dream. "He likes you," she said later, as we stood to the side. "Who?" "My son, Ethan." I smiled. "He's a remarkable kid. He wants to be a doctor." "I know. He told me. He wants to find a cure, not just for himself, but for others." Her eyes softened. "That's Ethan. You raised someone incredible." "No," she said quickly. "I'm just a mother doing what mothers do." "Not all mothers," I replied. "Some run, some freeze, some pretend nothing is wrong. But you fight quietly, fiercely." She looked away, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve, trying to hide the emotion that crept into her voice. "I never planned to lead a reading group or teach anything. I just didn't want these kids to grow up thinking no one cared what they had to say. And now they speak, they read, they dream." For a long time, we stood there, just watching them, laughing, arguing, pretending, being kids. I felt something shift inside me again, the ache of my own past, the silence of rooms I never returned to, memories of people who raised me but never asked who I wanted to be. I never had what they have now, what Sarah gave them. And for the first time in a long while, I wanted to be part of something, not for legacy, not for name, but for meaning. I didn't want to just donate. I wanted to belong, to show up, to listen, and maybe to rebuild the man I had once hoped to be, long before money complicated everything. I didn't know what that would look like yet, but I knew where it started. With showing up again next Saturday, and every Saturday after. The Saturdays became a habit, not just for the kids, but for me. I rearranged my schedule, skipped business dinners, ignored invitations to galas. I told my staff I was unavailable those mornings. Some assumed I was taking up golf, others whispered about a woman. No one knew, and I didn't explain, not because it was a secret, but because it was sacred. Sarah and I rarely spoke during the sessions, not deeply, not about us, but about the books, the kids, the laughter, the noise. It was enough, more than enough. Sometimes Ethan would limp over and sit beside me, reading slowly, carefully, tracing the words with his fingers. Once, he asked, "Do you think I can really be a doctor?" I looked him in the eyes. "You already are one in here." I tapped his chest. "And if that heart of yours is half as strong as your mother's, you'll change the world." He beamed, not because he believed it, but because he wanted to. The others began to call me Uncle James, or just James. And for the first time since my parents died, the sound of my name without formality or title felt good, real, like I had stepped into a part of myself I forgot existed. But not everyone was thrilled. My niece, Alexandra, the only family I kept close, the one I raised after my sister passed, began to notice the changes, my absence at board meetings, the decrease in public appearances, the donations to programs with no return. She cornered me one evening. "People are talking. They say you're distracted, making decisions that don't make sense." "Maybe they make sense to someone else," I said. "Who?" "Your maid." She spat the word like it was poison. "Her name is Sarah." "I don't care." You used to. She paused, just long enough to let the silence sting. Look, if you want to play savior, fine, but don't ruin your reputation in the process. Is that what you think this is? I think you're a lonely man trying to fill a hole, and she's convenient. That boy of hers, his illness, it makes you feel useful. Maybe it does. Then do it quietly. Don't jeopardize what we built. What we built. I was beginning to see it clearly. Her idea of legacy, of empire, of power, it was built on fear, on scarcity, on control. Mine now was becoming something else. After she left, I stood alone in my library. The silence felt different this time, not empty, but spacious, ready to be filled with something new. And I knew Alexandra would never understand, but Sarah might. Ethan definitely would, because they didn't need me to be powerful. They just needed me to be present. And that was the kind of man I was learning to be. One afternoon, weeks after that argument with Alexandra, I visited the clinic again, not to intervene, but to accompany. Sarah had called me, hesitant, almost embarrassed. Ethan's tests were showing changes, complications. She didn't say the word, but I heard it anyway, decline. I met them outside. She didn't speak, just nodded. He smiled when he saw me. Hey, Uncle James. Did you bring more stories? Not today, buddy. But I brought myself. That's enough. Inside, the waiting room was full, quiet tension hanging in the air. Sarah sat stiffly, hands clasped tight. Ethan leaned into her, closing his eyes. The nurse called their name. I waited. An hour passed, then another. When the door opened, I stood. The doctor was one I knew, Dr. Robinson, brilliant, careful, honest. Can we talk privately? We stepped into a room. He showed me the scans, explained the risks, the surgery, the odds. We can try, he said. It's not guaranteed, but I believe it's possible if we act fast. The cost? Well, that's a conversation. There won't be a conversation, I said. Just do it. I signed the papers that night, arranged the transfer, no boards, no approvals, just action. When Sarah found out, she came to me. I told you not to get involved. I know. Why did you? Because I care. You shouldn't. I can't help it. She looked at me like I had lost my mind. What do you want in return? Nothing. No one gives away this much for nothing. I do. Not true. You don't know me, I said. Then help me. Help me understand. So I did. I told her everything, about my parents, about Alexandra, about the empire I built and the emptiness it left behind, about the nights I sat in my mansion and felt nothing, absolutely nothing, until I followed her, until I saw her, until I saw Ethan. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You should go, she said. I will. But know this, I don't pity you. I admire you. And no matter what happens, I'm not walking away. She didn't answer, but she didn't stop me either. That was enough. The next morning, I received a letter from Ethan. Dear Uncle James, thank you for being brave, for being different, for seeing us. I don't know what's going to happen in surgery, but if I don't make it, just know I'm glad I met you. You made my mom smile, and that's rare, really rare. I cried for the first time in years, and I prayed, not because I had faith, but because I was desperate. For the first time in my life, all the money in the world wasn't enough. And all that mattered was a boy, his mother, and a chance. The surgery day came like a storm we saw coming but couldn't escape. It was early, the city still half asleep, the sky painted in nervous gray. I picked them up myself. Sarah sat quietly in the front seat, her hands resting on her knees, fingers motionless. Ethan was in the back, humming a tune I didn't recognize, maybe something he made up, maybe a way to keep the fear away. At the hospital, everything felt sterile, fast, cold. Nurses moved with precision. Charts were passed. Consents were signed. Time moved in snapshots until we were told, "It's time." They let us walk with him to the doors. Sarah kissed his forehead, whispered something only he could hear. Then he turned to me. "Uncle James, if I wake up, will you bring me another space book?" "I will. The biggest one I can find." "Cool. Maybe about Mars." "Deal." And then he was gone. Sarah sat in the waiting room. I sat beside her. We didn't speak. Not much needed saying. Every beep, every overhead call, we both flinched. After a while, she leaned on me, just slightly, but enough to tell me she trusted me, not with money, but with her fear. Hours passed. Finally, the surgeon came out. "He's stable. The procedure went well. There were risks, but we managed. He'll need time, but right now, he's here, and he's fighting." Sarah exhaled, like she hadn't breathed in days. She didn't cry, not in front of them, but her hand reached for mine and held on. When they let us see him, he looked small, tubes, machines, but peaceful. A nurse whispered that he responded when they spoke, fluttered eyes, fingers moved. It would be a slow climb, but the mountain wasn't impossible anymore. Later, when she finally slept, curled on the hospital couch, I stepped outside to call Alexandra. She didn't pick up. Instead, I left a voicemail. "I'm not the man you knew anymore. I've changed. Not because of charity, not because of guilt, but because I finally learned what it means to show up for someone, not with money, but with time, with heart. If that makes me foolish in your eyes, so be it." I hung up. The next day, flowers arrived, and books from people I didn't know, messages from neighbors, from parents of the kids in the reading group. They had heard, somehow, and they wanted to help, wanted to give something back. But I didn't need anything. I already had what I'd been missing for years, purpose, not for my company, not for my wealth, for my life. And for once, I didn't feel alone anymore. Ethan's recovery was slow but steady. Every day brought a new sign, a twitch of his fingers, a slight lift of his eyelids. The first full sentence he whispered made Sarah break, not in front of him, of course, but later, in the hallway. She wept into her hands, and I stood beside her, not trying to fix it, just letting her feel. The hospital became a second home. Nurses greeted us by name. We learned the rhythms, the silence between tests, the patterns of hope and fear. Sarah never left his side, and I never left hers. It was during one of those long nights that Carmen showed up, Sarah's sister. I didn't know she existed. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, family, pride, silence, the usual reasons. But now Carmen was there, holding a small bag, her eyes full of questions. I watched them speak in low tones by the window, too far to hear, but close enough to see the walls between them crumble. When Sarah returned, she didn't explain. She just said, "Thank you for giving him a chance, and for giving me mine." We didn't talk about what that meant. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Sarah looked lighter, stronger, not because things were easier, but because she wasn't carrying them alone. The day Ethan opened his eyes fully, he asked for juice. Sarah laughed, a real laugh, the kind that shakes your shoulders, the kind that makes everyone else smile, too. I brought him a book, not just about Mars, but about the whole galaxy, and he devoured every page like it was air. "Uncle James," he said, "when I grow up, I want to be like you." "Don't," I answered. "Be better. And if you can, bring someone with you." A week later, Sarah was invited to speak at an educational forum. Someone from the city had heard about her work at the community center. Her story had started to spread, not as gossip, but as inspiration. She almost didn't go. "What if I don't belong in that room?" she asked. You belong in every room, I said, especially the ones where no one expects you. She stood on that stage like she owned it. Her voice was calm, firm, clear. People leaned in, listened, not because she was famous, but because she was honest. Afterwards, she stood beside me, gripping a paper with new contacts, new possibilities. I'm scared, she said. Me, too, I replied. But we do it anyway. That's how we grow. And then Alexandra called, not with anger, but curiosity. Can we talk? We met at a cafe, quiet, central, neutral ground. She looked tired, older, or maybe just humbled. I don't understand all of this, she admitted, but I see that it matters to you. And maybe I need to see it, too. I didn't answer. I just smiled, because sometimes change starts with just showing up. A year passed, just like that, not fast, not slow, just full of changes, full of learning, full of moments that stitched a new kind of life into mine. Ethan was walking again, slower than before, but steady. Sarah was running workshops now, not just for kids, but for mothers, for families, for anyone who felt invisible and wanted to speak. And me? I became James again, not Mr., not Sir, not billionaire, just James. I still attended some meetings, checked in with my board, but my heart was somewhere else. In the Saturday mornings, in the chalkboards, in the smell of worn books and crayons, in the way Ethan laughed when he made a new friend, in the way Sarah glanced at me when she thought I wasn't looking. The mansion was quieter these days. Alexandra didn't visit often, but when she did, we talked, real talk, not business, not strategy. We talked about our childhood, about regrets, about forgiveness. One night, we sat in the garden. She asked, "What are you going to do with all of it?" All of what? The fortune, the legacy, the empire. I looked at the stars, the same ones Ethan loved. I'm going to give it away. She blinked, once, twice. To who? To those who will use it to build, not to control. And the company? I'm setting up a foundation, autonomous, transparent. Sarah will be one of the advisors. You're giving her a seat at the table. She's already been leading without one. You're not worried what people will say. Let them talk. I finally have peace. That night, I wrote a letter, not for the public, not for the press, but for myself. Dear James, you lived most of your life believing power was in control, in walls, in distance. But you were wrong. Real power is in connection, in presence, in love. Sincerely, the version of you who finally learned to see. Weeks later, a ceremony was held in the park near the community center, not a big event, just people who mattered, families, friends, students. Ethan sat in the front row, Sarah beside him, Carmen too. Alexandra stood at the edge, watching, listening. I walked to the front, no suit, no notes. I just spoke. I spent decades climbing ladders, chasing numbers, winning applause. But none of it compares to what I've found here, to what you've given me, a chance to matter, to make meaning, to be human again. People clapped, but I wasn't done. I looked at Sarah. You changed my life, not by saving me, but by letting me see yours. Her eyes welled, but she held firm, like always. Afterwards, as we packed up, Ethan tugged my sleeve. Do you still have that book about Mars? I do. Can we read it together one more time? Always. We sat on the grass under the trees. The world spun on, but in that moment, nothing else existed, just a boy, a story, and the man who finally understood what life was truly about. Months later, the leaves began to fall again, golden, slow, like the universe reminding us to let go, to make space. The air turned colder, but not harsh, just enough to make the coffee warmer, the walks quieter, the silences more meaningful. Sarah and I had found our rhythm, not as boss and employee, not even as partners, just as people who had seen each other completely, who had stayed when they could have left, who had chosen honesty over comfort. Some nights, we sat in her kitchen, sipping tea, listening to old music on the radio. Ethan would be asleep, Carmen would be reading in the other room, and we'd just sit. Not to plan, not to debate, just to be. You know, she said one night, looking into her mug, I used to think love was something big, dramatic, like the movies. And now I think it's someone who shows up, who stays through the boring parts, the hard parts, someone who remembers how you take your tea. I smiled. I used to think love was control. But now I think it's freedom, freedom to become who you really are with someone who sees it before you do. The silence after that was full of understanding, of memory, of hope. We didn't get married, not right away. There was no rush, no need for declarations. The people who mattered already knew. And the love we built didn't need a label. It just needed room to grow. The community center expanded, with help, with grants, with volunteers. Sarah trained others, built teams, created systems. Ethan spoke at schools, at events. He shared his story, not with bitterness, but with fire. One evening, he stood on stage, nervous, proud. I thought my life was over. But someone saw me. Someone believed in my mom, and she believed in me. Now I want to do the same for others, because every kid deserves to be seen, and every mother deserves to be heard. His voice shook, and so did mine. Later, back in the car, he asked, "Do you think I'm ready?" "You were born ready." He leaned back, smiled. "I think we're going to be okay." "We are," I said, looking at the city lights flickering through the windshield. "We really are." And as we drove into the night, past the towers, past the noise, past the old life I left behind, I felt it again, not success, not pride, but peace, a rare kind, the kind that only comes when you finally make it home, not to a place, but to the people who teach you what really matters. And I knew then that everything I thought I had lost had simply been waiting on the other side of courage.